We're launching our first ever seminar event, the Fine Home Building Summit. Join us October 2nd through the 4th in Southbridge, Massachusetts, as 12 of the building industry's most notable experts will offer more than 50 hours of presentations. Our goal? To explore advanced design principles, discover cutting-edge construction materials, and share trusted techniques. Space for this event is limited and expected to sell out fast. Don't wait. Visit finehomebuilding.com/summit to pre-register. That's finehomebuilding.com/summit. Reaching your hand in the disgusting mat of leaf litter is the worst part.
I kind of like it.
It almost looks like one of those...
That's the gardener in me.
It almost looks like one of those things you'd like fling a tennis ball to your dog with, right?
Exactly.
Maybe it doubles as that. I don't know.
You could just fling leaf litter to your dog. Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Design Editor Kiley Jacques.
Hello.
Digital Brand Manager Rob Watzak.
Hi.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Hello.
Please email us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. So for those of you who are listening who want some further explanation of the beer koozie insulation test, well, just hold on with us one more week when Matt will be back in his seat and we can rope him in on the conversation. Are you familiar with the work we've done with...
I briefly listened to the conversation.
All the brain cells that were killed on that effort.
And while I was actually publishing the show notes for it last time, when I saw that topic come up, I did some quick research, and apparently it's like the Craft Brewers Association of America or some organization like that has a really nice website, and they had a very extensive scientific research paper on beer koozie.
Well, we've been working with them.
Extensively.
What's wrong with us that we didn't find that first?
So we've heard from a number of you who were had to weigh in on that and our bad science. So if you just bear with us, we'll get back to that and hopefully clear up some confusion.
But it was good beer.
Poor judgment.
Poor judgment.
On all counts.
I have to remember what the name of that brewery is. Once again, when we revisit this topic, I'll have that so you all can sample Poor Judgment for yourselves. So on a couple of other things we heard from listeners about, the first one comes from Yodam. Hey, just came across this wool bat insulation and noticed their advertising claims that it works as a filter for the air coming into your house. Thought we would have fun with it.
Well, you know, houses got to breathe, right?
So you want some filtration, right?
You want some clean air coming in.
So, I mean, it shouldn't surprise me that someone who makes insulation would be talking about how, this is an excellent filter, but... You'd think that if they were involved in this industry, they would have some fundamental understanding of what insulation does and doesn't do.
Right.
But regardless of that, do you think that wool insulation is a bad idea, or do you think it might be all right?
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But we don't know if it works. How can you be all for it if it doesn't work as insulation?
Well, why wouldn't it work?
I mean, it keeps sheep warm.
Yeah. I mean, you make sweaters out of wool.
Right.
There you go.
And in fact, wool clothing when you're in a wet environment is some of the best type of clothing to have because it
also smells good.
Spoken like a true New Englander.
It keeps its insulation properties unlike a lot of other fibers, even when it's wet.
So you could have leaks and air leaks in your building envelope, and the wool insulation will still perform.
Yep.
So
it's an air filter.
I actually did a little reading on this because I'm like, how much wool does it take to insulate a house? But the thing is, sheep have to be shorn often, and most wool is a waste product.
Right. You don't use most wool.
Yeah.
Another good reason to use it.
So, I mean, I don't know if you guys have been around sheep. I haven't been around sheep a lot, but I can tell you the ones I have been around are kind of disgusting.
Smelly.
And their fur is nasty. Like, do you
There's
want that
got to be
stuff?
some kind of cleaning of it before it goes into walls, right?
Yeah.
And all
Full
of
of
you
bacteria.
people who love sheep and have them, don't write to me. I take it back. The sheep are lovely. They're not disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, if they air seal the walls properly, who cares? I mean, they say that you don't need gloves handling it like you would with fiberglass or rock wool, or you don't need dust masks.
And if you get cold on the job site, you can just wrap yourself in it.
Sure. Just take a nap in the corner on a pile of wool, right?
Thanks for that, Yodam. We also heard from Adam. He says, hey, podcasters, I live in a suburb of D.C. In February of 2017, we had a windstorm that blew off roof shingles and siding on lots of homes, luckily not mine. Since then, all the homes have been repaired except this one, and we have a photograph of it. I see it every day as I drive my kids to school, and every day I want to knock on the door and ask what the heck is going on. Enjoy. So, I have one of these houses missing its siding in my neighborhood as well, and it's been like that for years. That's Rob's house. He's probably missing some siding too.
I'm missing siding, but that's just because of laziness.
Have you guys noticed homes in your travels that have just been like either not fixed or missing elements for a long time?
Yeah, but I always just figured it was a work in progress.
Yeah.
Well, we're breaking up here. What's going on with the mic?
I think it's fine.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Really? Okay. So that house that we were focusing on for a while
right down the
ago, down the street there, Antique
that
House.
Did come to mind,
It took a while, and sometimes it's like people are just dealing with the insurance companies, or just don't have the money to get to it yet, or the time to get to it yet. So
I kind of think that they probably took their insurance check and spent it on something else, and now they don't get to fix their house, which happens, right?
Sure.
The money pit.
Even if they're not, there's always money needed somewhere, right? Okay. So, Rob, you have been working on your barn. Last time you were on, you told us you were starting to work on completing your envelope so you could condition it somewhat for wintertime fabricating.
Yeah, when I built my barn, it's basically just bare studs and sheathing on the inside for years because it was just a kind of a utility space, and I don't work on it in the winter because of that. So
you don't work on it in the winter because you'd like slide down on the hill on the snow and ice that is behind it.
I love the spot where it is. If anybody goes to the website and takes a look, my barn has the whole back wall of my barn is all glass. You can't see that in the picture, but you can see that it's about 40 feet above this hillside that overlooks the Housatonic River.
It's a lovely spot.
It's a great space to work.
I don't think barn when I look at that structure.
No, well,
you have to go in it.
Yeah. But so the inside is just bare studs and rafters and sheathing. And so the rafters just sit right down on top of the top wall plates, which isn't often a tough place to deal with your air sealing and insulation because you've got this sort of narrow angular cavity there. And I hadn't even run the loft floor subfloor all the way to the edge of the joist. So
tell folks what you did here, so because they can't see the photos.
Yeah. So basically, I patched in the ends of the joist. I mean, the ends of the subfloor upstairs to enclose the space all the way to the rafters, and then I've just been doing the cut and cobble method of taking some rigid foam and jamming it in the spaces in there, getting it back.
So you're
as far as
sealing the
I can.
end of the rafter cavities between the roof sheathing and the top plate with these little rectangles of foam, and that's to stop airflow so you can condition the space. So obviously you're going to have an unvented roof assembly when you're done.
Actually, no. The tricky part was that I was holding it off of the roof, so I was cutting those to fit tight and pushing them in there and leaving about 1.5 inch gap between the roof sheathing and the foam insulation. So
that explains why you did have soffit venting on the outside. I was a little confused by that, but I thought it might be just because you were taking up space.
Yeah, no. So it was sort of a 2-phase project. I went in and closed up the soffits, which ever since I built the place, I had never bothered to do.
Were birds attacking you as you were doing this work?
Well, no, they were all their babies were all off, flown the coop, but it sure smelled like birds in that loft. So I'm glad to finally, after like 10 years of this thing being open to the outdoors, finally keeping the birds and critters out. And from my experience insulating my attic in a similar manner, once it's tightly insulated, since it's a temporary workspace, I just bring in a little electric heater out there. As long as it's closed up tight, I don't need it to be 80 degrees in there. I just need it to be not freezing.
Right.
And so once
what do you have for a floor in there?
Actually, the floor is tongue and groove 2x6s that came from an old water tank from a farm.
Cool.
So
Rob knows how to do things.
No, it's probably like fur or something like that.
Neat.
Yeah. But so I'm not quite done filling in all the gaps with some foam and spray foam and.
You need a foam gun, can I point out?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, what
He's
how's
using
he
the
doing?
straw cans, and I can tell because it's
a mess.
It's a mess.
Yeah. I actually.
Are you just going to leave it exposed like that?
No. So I'm filling in the ends of these cavities so then I can put batt insulation in the ceiling and then eventually drywall. So it'll be
Okay,
it'll be a finished
finished,
space because it's as much for fire safety and other things that I want to.
We should tell folks the difference between a foam gun and straw dispensed canned foam. So, like, professionals in the weatherization and air sealing businesses, right, use foam guns that take a canister without a nozzle on it. It's threaded, and it goes into this gun with a valve on it that allows you to control the flow, and it offers a lot more control, and it allows you to get better yield from the foam because one of these straw cans, in my experience, once you open it and start using it, you have to use it all or it's junk.
Well, and plus the foam, the throwaway can with the plastic straw nozzle on it, it's like on or off.
Right.
It just throws the foam out of there. And if you're in a tight space like where I was working, I wasted a lot of foam too because it's unless if you're in a vertical or overhead situation, it's hard to get that stuff to stick to stuff until it sets and it just comes flying out and ricochets off of the framing.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah, I definitely wear rubber gloves and put down pieces of plastic to catch all the crap.
It's a mess.
What kind of coverage do you get with a single can?
Not as much as I would like, which is why Patrick is pointing out if I bought one of those canisters, it seems pricey. You're going to buy the gun for, I don't know, what are they, $30 is probably the cheapest you can buy one of those guns.
You can get them cheaper, but I wouldn't spend any less than $30.
Yeah.
And you can spend $200 if you try.
But if you do this even more than once, it's worth it to buy one of those. And
it's just so much. It's so less frustrating. It just works so much better.
And the stupid thing is that I know I have one of them lying around somewhere, but it probably needs to be cleaned out or something.
If you haven't used it in a while, it's junk anyway.
Yeah.
So I love that tool, and I buy them all the time.
Michelle?
It still is probably, even if you have to buy one every once in a while, it's still going to be cheaper or at least less frustrating than doing
It just
those
works
cans.
so much better.
Yeah.
And you've been like woodworking
Much
chick,
smaller project.
but you've been fixing your
Eureka.
life, right? So when
I'm
you
fixing my life. That's a big statement. I fixed a drawer. Yeah, I think I brought it up on the last show that I had a broken drawer, split in the center, and so I worked so much harder than this picture indicates to take wood out of the center to not have to deal with the profile, put it back together, and of course there's a big gap, so I'm removing all this wood, and yet it doesn't fit again and again and again. It finally fits, and then it just struck me as like kind of an existential exercise.
I think finished carpentry is generally, yes.
I can see how people get into it, but it is it's still a soft closed drawer, which I'm not sure how that works, but I was happy that it's not slamming, and I was feeling really good about it.
Nice. So you had the soft close hardware in there already?
Yeah. So where does that sit?
It's actually usually under the corners on the edges of the drawers. In fact, in a lot of the like, what is that one big company that makes the German company that makes a lot of drawer hardware?
Tefla?
Blum?
Yeah, Blum. It sort of, if it's the bottom drawer, it just sits right inside the case, and it's the nice thing about that kind of hardware is it usually has a lot of room for adjustment.
So I'm betting that Kiley has something lesser, if I had to guess.
Yeah. I would think so too.
So those are often side mounted, and often there's no adjustment. So if it's working great, count your blessings.
What about you?
Oh man, so I finished my cabinet doors for our wardrobe cabinet, and it doesn't look like much, but if so this morning
Looks like more than my drawer.
So this morning, as an exercise, I figured out how many hours I have in these two stupid doors,
Tell
right?
us.
So, okay, so here we go. To start making parts, which includes ripping the stock, sanding it, and cutting it to length, I would say 2 hours, right? So that's for 8 pieces of wood that you could carry is a small arm load, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have an hour in a glue up and dominoing, right? I didn't count the 2 hours I spent making and wasting time using the jig that didn't work.
Oh, you need to count that.
Okay, so if we count that, I'm going to add 2 more hours here. Okay, so then we have putting the rabbet on the backside of the doors, sanding the panels, and finish sanding the frame. So 2 to 3 hours for that. So we're already up to 6 hours. Not including the 2, so we're at 8 if we take all the time. And then I figure I have 3 hours in painting the panels and the frames.
And how many doors is that?
2.
2? So
If it makes you feel any better, I think I probably spent about 3 on my drawer.
So, if you guys remember, not long ago I worked at a cabinet shop for about a year, and I would make a whole set of kitchen cabinet doors.
In a day.
In a day, I would make like an entire kitchen's worth of door. But granted, that's having a sliding table saw, having carts that are the same height as the table saw. So you literally just pull all your stock onto the cart, you roll it over there, you spend like 2 hours at the table saw cutting everything.
So, and you understand better than most people, it doesn't take a lot more time to make dozens more parts, right? That's not the time-consuming part.
Yeah.
It's the all the other steps. So
and having an organized workspace and enough space and the right tools makes a huge difference.
yeah, so I have to start off my workday by cleaning the stuff away from the carriage doors to open them, and then I have to back out my tractor, right? And then I have to wheel my table saw out into the front lawn, and then I have to run extension cords to that. So there's probably...
Do you enjoy doing these things? Sounds awful.
That's a really difficult question.
So you've probably heard me complain lots of times about how I don't have enough workspace, and I use that as my excuse for not doing half of the projects that I want to do. And it's true. Like when I worked at a cabinet shop that was 10,000 square feet, and there were these tools where each tool had its dedicated space. And
There's no setups.
And you had a place to put the stock, and you had a place to put the finished cabinets, and you had and it was like there were no barriers to work. You just move on to the next step, and you don't even think about it.
Plus, you're getting paid.
There are only barriers to my work, I would say. To answer your question,
kudos to you, Patrick.
Do I like it? It's very satisfying.
Yeah.
Some things are fun. Some things are tolerable. Some things are just annoying.
Yeah. I was thinking about you guys this weekend when I was working on my little project. I thought, I hate this. I hate every single second of this. I'm doing this for the podcast. I'm sick of looking at this drawer.
It's like Rob said, if you're set up to do any kind of work, it's more enjoyable, right?
Especially like the tool. It's not frustrating.
And that goes back to even just setting up temporary workspaces on a job site. It's like the extra time put into making a rack to put materials on, or instead of just throwing your table saw up, actually creating or bringing an outfeed table. Every single one of those things, granted, if you're having to break down every day a big workstation, that's frustrating. But if you're there for the long haul, it just makes so much more sense to put a little more time in.
And it's so much less exhausting, right? If you have a space set up to do work efficiently, it's just it's less tiring.
This
I'm
is
sure
and
of it.
safer,
It's
too.
safer.
Yeah.
This is probably why builders don't want to take on small jobs, right? Because
Yes, it's very true.
I never
Set
thought
up and
about
break
that.
down.
Yeah.
I like doing little jobs, but half the time is spent in setting up for the job. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why years ago when I was still working as a remodeling contractor, I was determined to buy one of these big old vans. They were like
a
old
box truck
fires.
or something.
Yeah, an old box truck or something like that, where I was actually planning on
Building a shop.
building drawer slides and flip up sides that came out, so I could just slide my table saw right outside of the truck, just park it where I'm going to work, and not have almost like a pop-up shop.
That's what I'm picturing.
It's even more complicating. It's tough to get clients to pay for the time you spend. A, getting there, and then B, setting up and taking down. It's
Most
just
people don't get paid for that time.
It's just, you can't charge. It's difficult to charge enough to make that pay. Speaking of getting paid enough,
Nice lead-in.
Our first question comes from Tim, and he's from Maine. He says, I was wondering about your thoughts on the age-old problem of estimating for jobs. I've done small repair and remodeling jobs a number of years ago and am considering getting back into it. It is mostly to work with my son and get him started in the business, even though he is working with a carpenter right now. My niche was always doing small jobs that nobody else wanted to do. The problem is I did a lot of work for people without much money and never charged enough. Any on the opinions on the books put out by Craftsman Books like the National Repair and Remodeling Estimator? Also, is there a place for the guy working out of his pickup truck doing simple jobs? I feel there is. How many contractors are going to take the time to do something simple like replace a lock set, adjust a door in an old house, or repair a rotted fascia board? Would love to hear you guys discuss the subject of someone doing simple jobs and how to charge enough to make a living doing it. I always look forward to Friday mornings when I see the newest episode is up. Thanks. Oh, that's nice. Tim, thank you for writing.
There is a place for the guy working out of his pickup truck. It's my house. You are welcome anytime, Tim.
I'm finding actually recently it's a lot of people's houses because, you know, we publish our magazine with all these beautiful renovations and new homes, and, you know, they don't represent most of the houses in this country. And a lot of people just aren't doing huge projects, or they can't afford to pay someone to do that level of work, or they just need something fixed and they don't know how to do it themselves. And
ding, ding, ding.
I get people asking me all the time, friends and family members, all the time, oh, can you recommend I know a lot of carpenters. I know very few that I can recommend to do little jobs because they either don't want to do it or they're just too busy to do it. And again, we're going back to the whole, a lot of people just don't like the hassle of breaking down every single day and or doing even a half a day's worth of work because.
And like we were saying, it's difficult to charge enough.
Yeah.
And people balk. They're like, this is ridiculous. You're going to be here for 2 hours and you're going to charge me hundreds of dollars. Well,
No, see, to answer his question, I do think that there's some, like, I value that. There's got to be other people out there that value that and would pay for it, you know?
I think few would argue that there's a need for that. It's like how to make it work as a business is the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're fortunate living where we do in Western Connecticut that most people that we work with can afford to do those kinds of jobs. I mean, I felt like I was always able to charge what I needed to charge when I was a contractor doing small pickup jobs like that in this area, but maybe I'm just running in the right
Did
circles.
you have insurance and and trucks and bookkeeper and you know what I mean? Like to make a viable business, I don't know.
Well, you know, I think a lot of things like that, like you say, bookkeeper, I mean, if you're spending all your time doing the work and then you're spending your evenings doing all the books and stuff like that.
Terrible.
And estimating and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things is to try to, you may think it's impractical for a small business, but try to farm that stuff out as much as possible because it's just exhausting if you're doing everything and you're doing all the work. And I know from experience in my town, there's a woman, I forget what she calls her business, but she basically does piecemeal bookkeeping
for small businesses.
For small businesses, because there are so many small businesses that need that, and there are so many people in financial industries that might either be a stay-at-home mom or they might just not want to work a full-time job, and they piece it together.
Gig economy.
And you know, just sometimes it's just a matter of matching up the services that help both of those small businesses survive.
I would say, Tim, if you and your son are considering making a go of this kind of model, I would say make friends with every real estate agent in your area because they're going to be the ones who do a lot of referrals for people selling their homes who need repairs done and people who are buying them who need stuff fixed or changed. Locks are a perfect example.
And honestly, even make relationships with some high-end contractors because they don't always want. You know, they have a lot of good clients that don't want, and then they don't want to do those little piecemeal jobs. So if they have, in fact, I did that. Andy Engel's working for Hudson Valley Preservation right now. When I used to work for them full time, and then when I was out on my own, it's like there was a kitchen counter, butcher block counter one time that needed some refinishing work, and it was just easier for them to pay me to go out and do that than it was for them to go out and do it themselves.
And I'm sure contractors would welcome someone they could trust to do those. Those are important jobs. If you have to be able to take care of your good clients that way, right? When they need something little, they're going to call you first, and if you can keep them happy, they're going to call you for the bigger stuff too.
That's great advice, guys. I wish you could help me out.
Sorry, I'm busy.
I get asked to do these kind of things all the time, and for people I like, I will do it, but
It's sort of
it's really
interesting.
hard to charge enough.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, though, that I do work here and I have all of you guys as assets. And I reached out to Brian, too, just for recommendations for somebody in the area that would take on these small jobs. We've had this conversation before, but you all said the same thing. No, I don't know anybody who would do that.
I mean,
used to
no
be
one
that
we would,
guy, yeah.
Yeah.
no one we would trust to send to you, right?
Yeah.
It's a very special niche. Remodeling generally is about customer service, and this is like on a much bigger scale because you're talking about to make a viable business, you have to have lots of customers, and it's hard.
Yep.
I would say for anyone starting a remodeling or home repair business, there are a couple of books that I would highly recommend. The newest one is Nail Your Numbers by David Gerstel, and it deals mostly with estimating and cost tracking so you don't get yourself in trouble like so many remodelers do. And then he has an older book that is published by Taunton called Running a Successful Construction Company, and that covers more generally how to run a business as a remodeler. And then another one I'm a big fan of, The Elements of Building, by Mark Curson, which is little more than a bunch of anecdotes from someone who's been in the business a long time. But I can tell you, someone who's been a remodeler for a long time has lots of educational anecdotes, and Mark's are really good. It tells you how to deal with suppliers and subcontractors and your clients and bookkeepers and all these people that can help you make your business successful. And then also from Fine Home Building contributor Sean Van Dyke, Profit First for Contractors is another title that is worth checking out. So all of those things together, and you will likely have a much better business than you would if you didn't check them out.
Speaking of Sean, he over the years has done a lot of business blog posts on our website. So if you head out, search for the Building Business blog on finehomebuilding.com, and Sean has a lot of good advice for people on how to not just organize and run your business, but just how to take the reins and just be a powerful business person, just be a strong business person.
Yeah, that's a good skill. I mean, it matters.
Yeah, attitude is a big part of success, being a successful business person, having confidence in yourself and your work and just being able to put yourself out there.
Gotta have some people skills, too.
Boy, that's important.
Yeah.
Especially for remodelers, right?
Exactly. You're in people's homes.
You're in people's homes, and you need their trust. Andy Grace told me one time, we were kind of teasing him because he bought this new expensive pickup truck, right? It was probably $50,000 or $60,000. And he said, well, you have to have this because if you showed someone's house in your rust bucket, they're going to think you're going to take all their money. And I was like, well, that's a good point.
Yeah, but you can also look at it the flip side. Like I know somebody who had a bunch of guys in rusty old pickup trucks start working on her house, and then they showed up a little bit later on after they had
started with new trucks.
Some really nice trucks and nice tools. Like, am I paying these guys too much?
So maybe you buy the new truck in between jobs, right?
Yeah.
That's funny.
And our next question comes from Joshua from Cincinnati. We have a large maple tree over the house along with a large oak tree, neither of which I'm willing to cut down. After this past fall and spring, though, and cleaning gutters was not my top priority, my new gutters have a near forest growing in them. I did clean them out by hand at least once, but as the helicopters continued to fall, the gutter cleaning task fell to the bottom of my to-do list. My question is, there is so much debate and inconsistent information online regarding gutter guards. In your all's experience, what is the most reliable style/brand method of gutter guards in a high debris environment like I have? I realize that the job of gutter cleaning will not completely vanish, but I'd like to restrict it to at most twice a year rather than 5+ times. Any recommendations? Apologies for its... Oh, okay. So, what do you think?
I've never had any real experience with any of the fancier new ones. You go to the trade show booths and you see them with the little fountain running water over the top of them, and they look like they work so great.
Except they're not throwing debris at it. That's what I
there's no wind-driven rain or anything like that. I don't know. I mean, the only ones I really have experience with are those old
mesh things.
old mesh ones. And in-laws, my in-laws used to make me climb up on their roof every time I went to go visit them to scrape those things out. So even those don't work great.
So my observation with those is yes, they keep the leaves out of the gutter, but then there's a mat of leaves on top of the gutter.
Yeah.
What do you call this?
Cover.
Yeah.
Mesh.
I mean,
What about the? Do you know the Leaf Blaster Pro gutter glove? That looks promising. It's professionally installed. It's a mesh, but it's a micro mesh.
Oh.
I don't know. It
Micro
looked
mesh.
impressive, and it's professionally installed, so it's got to be good.
The one
Yeah.
I'm familiar with, and I think got a lot of traction early in the marketplace, I bet it was 2 decades ago, was called Gutter Helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They make more than one. Isn't that a brand?
It's a brand. I think it's a franchise,
Yeah.
right? And I first saw them on this old house probably in the 80s.
How does the water get in?
So surface tension allows it to follow around and go in there.
Okay.
And I know people who have, so this costs thousands of dollars to have these installed. You still have to clean the gutters occasionally because the
You just remove the
surface
helmet.
tension makes the pine needles and acorns and stuff also stick and roll in there too. So,
Right.
I mean, it's not a panacea.
I found a fun resource that I wanted to share with these guys.
Lay it on me.
His name is Robert Lenny, and he's a 7-time U.S. patent holder in gutter guard design and co-author and leading authority on gutter cleaning. So he has a great PDF for gutter cleaning. His guards have been featured on ABC, NBC, and CBS.
So what's his branded
So
product?
I recommend contacting him. I think it was a little confusing because it looks to me like his product is this leaf blaster, but it just said leaf blaster when I was
So is
looking
leaf
at,
blaster a thing to clean your gutters or to keep leaves out of the gutter?
No, it's an actual gutter guard.
Okay.
It's a gutter glove.
So what exactly is a gutter glove?
It's just another word for guard, I think.
You sure?
You can patent
No,
it.
I'm not sure. Don't
can
quote me on
trademark
any
it.
of
When I
this.
hear gutter glove, I kind of think like you don't want to stick your hand in that pile of
That's
rotten
what I was
leaves,
thinking too.
and you put the gutter glove on, and then you just scoop it out.
Yes.
I like Peter Yost's attitude. I am the gutter guard.
Yeah.
I have seen and I've used these sort of pressure washer angle attachments.
I've seen those too. What do you think?
I think blasting it out with water works pretty well. I
Yeah,
mean,
it depends
But
on
you
how-
can't see what you're doing.
Yeah, and you can't get the bottom growth mat. You know?
Right?
come on. Have you ever used a pressure washer before? That'll peel that stuff right
Okay,
off
so
of there.
but your gutter is 25, I don't know, 15
yeah,
feet
it all
in the
depends
air.
on how
and-
high up in the air. But I mean, I don't know.
So I don't know if you guys have seen this, and I'll put a link on the website. I haven't done that yet, so you guys will have to remind me. But there's this little robot you can buy, and you put it in, and
This is gonna be the
and it's
robot
got
for
little
everything.
little wings that kind of tough the stuff out, and it looks great at the hardware show. But I can tell you, it's not doing squat in the real world. All I can say is either get rid of your gutters, right?
I thought about that.
Yeah,
Can
and
you
so-
put like rain chains without gutters?
No.
But some people do what's called a ground gutter, where they basically do like a gravel trough below their gutters in their garden beds.
Yeah.
And
So in northern New England, people don't have gutters, right? Because they rip off the house in the wintertime. They get full of ice and snow, and then they just pull down.
Yeah.
So people just don't have them. And everywhere else in the country, people think that's just abhorrent. How could you possibly have a house without gutters? But
Do you guys have gutters?
I do. I hate them. I hate them.
I hate them too.
well, we just had 2 giant maple trees taken down in our 2 neighbors' yards, so I'm very excited to see how few trees grow in my gutters this year.
I'm lucky because I only have a single-story house, so my gutters in many cases are like 10 feet off the ground. So a little extension ladder, and I can do the whole things in a whole house in a couple hours or an hour.
Yeah, I actually don't mind doing it if I feel safe. But if you get too high in the ladder, then I don't like to do
And
it.
the thing is, a gutter is super slippy with a ladder leaning against it, right? It's like
I have to put my ladder
grease
on my
on there.
deck to get up there.
So there's a lot of tasks like that I don't mind doing, but if you added them all up, it would add up to a lot more time than I actually have in my life. So I understand this guy's concern. You know, I mean, it's just you don't want to have to do it 5 times a year. Sounds excessive, but I guess if he's got a lot of leaves.
Yeah, I think he's got to get rid of his gutters. And there's a feature that we did in 2009 in Fine Homebuilding, and it talks about the in-ground gutter thing that Rob mentioned, and that's the only solution I know of other than to pay someone else to clean them, which is surprisingly affordable, I've learned.
Can you get people to your house to do it?
Well, so there are companies, and they often are the same companies that are clean your windows, right? So they're window washing companies and gutter cleaning companies, and I think it's for about $100 or $200 you can have someone clean your gutters, and
That's worth it.
especially if they're high up.
Yeah.
This is another one of those guy in a pickup truck kind
That's
of
what I'm
businesses
thinking.
too.
Yeah.
Landscapers might do it, or we had our neighbor, an elderly neighbor of ours, hired some guy to clean her gutters, and since we were always helping her out with projects around the yard, she just gave him an extra $50 and he cleaned mine. So
Yeah.
maybe that's the key, is just save your change in a jar, and then a couple times a year pay somebody to come and do it for you.
So when I was in my 20s, that was a job that I would do for my neighbors because, one saw me doing it for one neighbor, and then they would say, "Well, you clean gutters."
Right.
And it was in a World War II, post-World War II era housing development with these like little 2-story brick homes and with low slope roofs. So I could just climb up on the roof and then go around and clean them from the roof, which it was pretty good money for how easy it was. You just had to be willing to go on the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also seen this little scoopy thing at the home center that's made of flexible plastic.
Yeah, I've got one of those.
And that looks like a great thing because, as you suggest, like reaching your hand in the disgusting mat of leaf litter is the worst
I
part.
kind of like it.
It almost looks like one of those.
That's the gardener in me.
It almost looks like one of those things you'd like fling a tennis ball to your
Yes,
dog with,
exactly.
right?
Oh, yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
Maybe it doubles as that. I don't know.
You could just fling leaf litter to your dog. Is that mean?
No, depends on the dog.
So, Kathryn from Seattle wants to know about solar panels. Do you guys have any suggestions on the aesthetics of solar panels? So often they're literally a bolt-on afterthought. Now that people in the whole state of California are designing them in from the beginning, how can we make them look beautiful? There's obviously the idea of building integrated roofing tiles, but those are pretty niche and expensive. I like the idea of using adhered thin film solar panel in the valleys of standing seam roofing, but that's also very non-standard. What are your thoughts? Are we ever going to get away from having to leave a huge gap on the roof edges and the ridge for fire code? Most other countries don't have this requirement, and their fire losses don't seem to be very high. Thanks very much for the great podcast. I was listening to the episode on carpenter bees and smiling so much that one of my colleagues commented on it. So I don't know if she was laughing at our ignorance about carpenter bees or something else, but thank you very much for that, Kathryn.
So I learned something. See, I put together the fact that she was talking about California and she was talking about this gap, and I was like, "What are you talking about, gap?" You've seen my solar
Yeah,
panels.
I thought of your place, too.
They're like inches from the edge of my roof on all four sides, and I love it because it looks like almost looks like I have
Yeah.
a metal roof.
Yeah.
And
So-
in California, the requirement is because they have so many issues with fire out
Yeah.
there that they need access at the top of the ridge.
Well, so in the 2018 it's code, it's the IRC, it's nationwide.
Oh, really?
It's
Oh,
for
is that right?
firefighters need access. And of course, solar panels are very slippery, so firefighters can't walk up your solar panels.
So
right?
how'd you get away with that?
Well, I guess mine is. Well, we're
You're
not
not on the
we're not on
2018
2018 code in Connecticut yet.
So that's the reason for the
That
access.
that big gap does make a big difference in terms of the aesthetics. I
Yeah.
think that the solar shingles are going to catch on. I mean, I feel like there's traction for it. It just needs to gain momentum.
I want to point out that there are some downsides to these thin film products, right? Is what they're called, or amorphous products. They're instead of glass, they're the PV power generating part is embedded in like a silicone layer, and you can actually roll them up. I've gotten samples of them, but they generate half as much electricity as a per square foot as a regular glass topped PV panel like you have in your house.
But the price of all those products is coming down every year, so maybe it'll get to a point where they're
and some people
viable.
are selling back to the grid. So maybe they're making surplus that they don't need. So if it's generating less, maybe it'll be enough for some.
Well, but it still comes down to the bottom line. Like I've been watching the.
It's always going to be more expensive to put on twice as many panels, no matter what their composition is, than fewer, right? It's just
because like on my house, based on my demand, they had just enough room to put enough panels to cover my usage. And if I went with one of those lesser products, I would have had to put them on my barn and my shed. I would have had to put them all over the place. And
the elephant in the room here is the Tesla Corporation, right? And you put a photo in here in our slideshow. And to be honest, I'm not sure if this is a real roof. I have not actually seen a Tesla roof. And if it's out there and any of you who are listening know about it, please tell us. But I've seen lots of illustrations of what a Tesla roof will look like, but I've yet to see one installed. So if they're out there, please let us know. Because I think they've been kind of disingenuous with regard to, they showed us pictures of the ones that were supposed to look like tile and steel roofing and asphalt shingles, and none of these things existed at the time. So maybe they do now, but...
I think that there was an announcement made that they're launching version 3 of their solar roof, as they call it. I think that's what that is an illustration of.
But, if we're talking about retrofits, that's one thing. But if we're talking about new houses, I think what it comes down to is just... it's an aesthetic detail that's new, and anytime there's new aesthetic details or new technical devices in our environment, a lot of people balk at them.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time.
So it may just be a matter of just designing to match the shape of the panels in a way that is aesthetically pleasing,
There's a magazine called Solar Builder magazine, and they've got this buyer's guide that they continually update that gives profiles on the newest modules on the market and surveys of manufacturers and technology trends. So there are so many companies working on it. Clearly it's something that people are very interested in. There's a market for it. It's just the right product hasn't gotten out there enough yet. But it's like those T-studs, right? It's new.
No, it's not.
It's new.
It's not like that at all.
It hasn't been tested. People are apprehensive, but I think her concern about aesthetics is widely shared.
Yeah, sure.
So
I think the concern of aesthetics is unfounded, but I think solar panels are beautiful because they're practical and they don't make greenhouse gases.
Yes.
But I mean, it's the same thing as like those
their function is beautiful.
The mini splits I have in my house. That was the main reason why my wife didn't want me to install them. I mean, other than they were expensive, but she's thankful now that I did. But it's like, there are so many of these things that become eventually part of our environment, but when they're new, just a lot of people don't like change.
I'm going to toss something out here, and you guys tell me what you think about it. Because this question made me start thinking about how to, this is a thing, right? Mm-hmm. I think panels are great. I think they look great the way they are.
You do? You think they really
Absolutely.
do?
There's this...
Even with that big gap she's referring to? That's hideous.
It says to me, I'm making electricity, which is beautiful, right?
Okay, those are two different things, though.
Maybe, yeah, agreed. So what if you had a roof that was in two different planes, right? You have these access walkways, right? And the roof plane is physically higher, so it lines up with the photovoltaic panels. The practical side of me said, this is stupid. Why would you make something more complicated that works really well? Mm-hmm. But I think it might solve some of those aesthetic challenges. You could also have a similar thing along the ridge, so it brought the panels and the roof that doesn't have panels on it all into the same plane.
Well, I got something even maybe a little more streamlined than that, because doing roof transitions is...
It makes no sense.
It's tricky. Why not build a rack system that has maybe screen or blank sections that can flip out of the way for access, that are for safety reasons? Like basically almost like a catwalk.
So you'd have dummy panels, basically.
You'd have almost like a screen catwalk. I mean, like you said, there's all these people trying to solve these problems. That I'd challenge one of these solar installation hardware companies to start building trim pieces that
and
go
you could
around
integrate that right into the racking, right?
Yeah, and run the racking right to the edge of the roof, and then have basically the same kind of screen that you'd have on a catwalk, that from a distance, if it was black just like the panels, would just look like a single plane with the panels. And you might, you'll see the texture being a little bit different. But
so you think it's just the change in plane that is so...
Well, no, not just the change in plane,
people?
but having a single surface. I mean, you think of a single surface like a roof plane. You want it. You just naturally want it to go all the way to the edge of the building.
Sure, no, I get it. I'm just wondering if that's the only thing that's aesthetically.
I think it's one of them. I don't think it's the only thing.
Yeah, I mean, some people just flat out don't like them, and I think some people just have a chip on their shoulder about them. It's not like if they really looked at something else that they thought was attractive, they might like it, but just people are just used to seeing shingles on roofs, and that's what they expect. And but I honestly think that it might be an accessory solution. I mean, really though, my solution, if I had more room on I've said this before, I would just put the panels on like a carport or a pergola.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then
That's a big freaking pergola, though, dude. I mean,
hey,
most people need more room than that.
I would love to have that much space to park cars underneath.
It would make a great carport. Agreed. But then, like carports are generally low slope or shed roofs, and that doesn't work well in our climate as an example, and it has to be oriented the right way. So
orientation's
the other thing you can do is put them on the ground.
Yeah. You don't see ground-mounted ones very often.
Because they're more expensive.
Are they?
Yeah.
Well, because you have this big rack that's, instead of just a single channel of aluminum like angle iron that's bolted to your roof, you've got footings in the ground, you've got big columns.
And your roof is doing double duty if you have them on the roof. The roof is already there.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of solar farms where you just buy into solar power.
So then you don't have it on your own house. Instead of having
it's elsewhere, you buy it.
Local, regional,
Yeah.
But again, that's another one of those things that, like in my town, right now, there's plans to put in a solar farm. And in order to do it, they're going to clear cut a bunch of trees. And of course, there's a big uproar about that.
That's unfortunate.
And we have brownfield sites in town, but they need to be, the solar farms need to be very close to the grid to make them economical. So it's again a tough situation. People don't want it, but it's like I was driving on the Mass Turnpike the other day, and every single patch of bare grass along the turnpike had solar farms on it. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Massachusetts is very progressive with regard to solar power. Yeah. They have some of the best deals for net metering too, as I recall.
Yeah, a lot of incentives too.
I would love to have them in my house, and I would think they were beautiful.
I'm surprised you don't.
I have too many trees. I've actually looked into it, and the trees are not mine. They belong to my neighbors. So they get really mad when you start cutting down their trees.
Yeah.
I was really lucky that my neighbor was already planning on cutting down a tree that would have been in the way for me. So
that was like the best thing that happened to you this year.
All the trees falling down?
All of the trees coming down in your neighborhood.
Yep. Yeah, my garden's better. My solar panels work. It's great.
Soon your barn's going to be heated.
Yeah, I don't
You're
have to
not even
clean up
going to
my
come
gutters.
to work anymore.
So I have a love-hate relationship with trees. Like if you've ever seen a house out in the middle of a field, that would be the last thing I would want. But I hate cleaning gutters and raking leaves and all that stuff too. But I think it's a worthy trade-off. AJ from Washington writes, "Hello, podcasters. I have a situation that I tend to run into commonly here in the Pacific Northwest. Many homes in the 70s had cantilevered balconies and no G-tape to flash the framing with." So what is he talking about? So the common detail is they just run the floor joist long, right? And then they put a deck be on the cantilever joists. And because the joists are running always back into the house, you don't need any posts. It's a very California/Pacific look. And it's a disaster. The joists of the deck are an extension of the framing of the home, and since pressure treated was not approved in homes at the time, most of these frames are either dug for or cedar if you're lucky. As you can imagine, there's frequently rot. In this situation I'm writing about, there are two balconies with the same issues. To make matters worse, these two balconies were designed with 2x joists acting as flush beams coming out of the home at each end of the deck. So in order to have the decking running perpendicular to the house, which is what most people think looks best, they ran joists on the end of the balcony long, and then they're connected by joists that are parallel to the side of the house. I have not found a solution besides cutting back to the siding, installing a ledger, metal, and tape flashing, and placing a beam and posts in lieu of a beautifully designed but short-lasting cantilever deck. So his solution is the one I'm most familiar with, and that is you abandon the cantilevered section, you bolt on a regular ledger like you would with a conventional deck, you put an undergirder and posts on the side of the deck that's away from the house, and you go along with your business, right, and build a conventional deck.
But it basically completely ruins that elegant cantilever.
Yes. This customer is comfortable with making the 4 foot deep deck shorter, like 2 foot. Of course, we would go into the home and create a real mess by replacing the rotted joists, but that would typically be a much more expensive fix, and I have found 99% of people are not going to go with that solution. So what he's saying is you rip up the finished flooring, you rip up the subflooring, and you reframe the floor system with presumably pressure-treated joists that then cantilever out, and you rebuild the deck starting completely from scratch, which means you're probably going to have to remove part of the exterior wall, right? Because you have to get the floor joist under it, and you're going to have to tear out the existing patio door, which is almost certainly there. So this is a very intrusive
Yeah.
repair.
I wonder if it's really 99% of the people who don't want to do that. Because I mean, if I had a cantilever deck, I'd make a
want
mess.
to do it
I'd
right.
make a mess.
Yeah.
Because it's not that expensive. It's all labor.
Yeah,
right?
and making and tearing out the whole ceiling to get into the joists far enough to cantilever them and all. Yeah, it's just a big disruption, is what it is.
In this particular scenario, the complicating factor is that there's a roof below one end of the balcony and a deck with a sliding glass door where a typical post would go. Also, directly below each balcony is another sliding glass door. This would make angled bracing nearly impossible as well. Is there any way to defy gravity? Maybe the possibility of hanging the balcony? I'm sure something like that would require an engineer, which would probably put this project out of the customer's budget. Is there a way to improve upon the time-tested standard deck framing design that will also be approved by our local code enforcers? Thanks to all the work you put into the podcast, I found it a few months ago, became quickly addicted, and I'm nearly caught up with all 193 episodes. I think this is actually 197. So if you're still with us, AJ.
Yeah, but he said, I have learned and forgotten a lot.
All right.
Well, there was probably only 193 when he wrote that email.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Does
So
take
if he's still
there's
with
a lag
us.
period
yeah.
there, yeah.
What do we do? Tell this gentleman.
Oh, so I mean, I missed it the first time I read his email that he said he didn't think he could get away with the angled bracing, because that would be if he couldn't
Can you
put
make
posts
knee
in,
bracing strong enough to hold up a deck?
don't tell anybody, but the 4-foot balcony on the back
guys
of my
say that a
barn,
lot.
the 4-foot balcony on the back of my barn is built that way.
Well, do you think a code enforcement officer could do that? There are no prescriptive guidelines on how to.
No, you'd have to have an engineer.
Yeah.
You would definitely have to have an engineer.
You
to
built
do
that. You did that.
Don't tell anybody. I've since put posts in.
Oh, okay.
The problem is that's hard.
How long did you
Yeah.
have it like that before you put the post
I
in?
don't know, 8 years.
And did you sit out there?
Oh yeah.
More than one person?
I was going to say all
Yeah.
of you.
I wouldn't let more than 4 people go.
Yeah,
out
I
there.
mean, you
Yeah.
got it's an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't do that
No.
unless you get an engineer and probably steel. I don't think wood connections would do it
Yeah.
intuitively.
Yeah, there's a porch in a Victorian downtown building in my town that has these big cast iron brackets that hold a porch that I think it goes out like 3 feet probably.
You see these in New Orleans quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they had
How
lots
are
of
those
foundries.
those really shallow, I think they're called Juliet balconies. How are those built?
So I mean, it would have been one of 2 ways. It would either been like this, cantilevered, so there's steel or heavy timbers going back into the building, so they're bearing on the floor system inside the house, or the way I was describing with some sort of a bracket, which is usually also a decorative element. It might be a curved piece of metal or a framed bracket that they stucco over or side over. Or
So let's talk about this project specifically. So their clients are willing to tear into their house. He says most folks aren't, right? So I would say frame a new deck with pressure-treated lumber and then flash it. The missing link in all these older projects is they're just not flashed or poorly flashed. So I think if you, with modern materials, Tyvek Flex Wrap has this demonstration at every JLC Live and every International Builder Show on how to detail these extended floor joists and prevent water from coming in. So, and I think if you really wanted to do the best job, you'd get soldered copper and you would perhaps even slightly kerf it into the framing members to make it work even better.
That's what I have on my deck. Just what you just described.
Yeah, and like this is arguably easier because you're only talking about 2 members. You don't need to flash every single joist because the only ones that are sticking out of the house are the ones on the ends that are carrying the joist for the balcony.
That is the one sort of redeeming quality of this job, is that you're not if you do have to tear into the ceiling inside, you're talking about in 2 locations instead of a dozen or more.
Or a whole room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I would be really tempted to go that way in this particular case, especially because of the doors that would be blocked by posts. I think the best way to do this is actually to build a normal deck, as you suggest, with a ledger and supporting posts. But that's not going to work in this situation. And honestly, I mean, if this were my client, I would present them with a couple options at a couple different price points, right? We can rebuild it the way it's constructed with modern materials and doing a better job flashing. Or we can hire an engineer and try and devise some kind of knee brace solution. I think this kind of project lends itself to steel construction more than wood. because of these are big loads on these members here.
For cantilever,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So no, I mean, if I were doing this, I think I would just try to run the numbers on like 3 or 4 different options.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you'd luck out and you'd have some engineer who had experience with a similar project, especially if this is a common detail in the area,
Yeah.
and it might not be a big deal for them to just sort of rubber stamp something
That they've done before.
Another thing is that he said, he doesn't have room for posts, but that's as assuming the posts are at the extreme corners.
And they don't need to be.
And they don't need to be. So.
Especially if you're talking steel. You have a lot of flexibility with regard to where you put the posts.
Yeah,
do those sliding doors go all the way across, though?
It looks like there's a couple of
Sets
them.
of them.
Yeah.
Couple of different
Yeah,
sets.
so
in between them.
I
maybe.
mean, obviously it would be annoying to have steel posts right in front, but if it's 4 feet away, I mean, if you really want to if you don't want to lose the deck and it's the cheapest option, I would certainly consider doing some posts.
Yeah.
A ledger and post would probably be the cheapest, simplest option if you can find a place to put the posts.
Yeah, and you don't have any of the disruption of the inside of the house, right? It's all limited to the outside, which is way easier on your clients. If you're gonna like rip up all their subfloor or their basement ceiling, they're gonna be less into it.
But honestly, I think if you don't want to settle for a compromise like that, I think I would at least ask a local engineer or architect. Try to find somebody who's definitely done some remodels and some similar projects, and just throw it out there.
I think that's good advice. And to answer your question, can you defy gravity or hang it? Yeah, you could use tension rods and mount them up higher on the building, but once again, that's an engineered solution, especially the connection at the house.
Yep, I think jet engines. Just mount a little jet engine in each corner.
The neighbors would love that. I want to know, like, how people got away with building this. Like, didn't anyone say, like, isn't this going to be a problem?
I wonder how long it's been there. Did he say how?
He says 70s or 80s, so.
It's also hard to believe. I mean, those 2 cantilevered beams sticking out, they're holding a lot.
That's a lot of weight.
There's a lot of weight on those 2 things.
Didn't he say he's going to make them shallower? Or did he mean
he said they were
shorter?
willing?
He's willing to, which would mean that he didn't have to go as deep into the structure of the house if he was going to still cantilever it.
I can say 2 feet deep, though, is like not big enough for a chair. I mean, like.
I wasn't sure if he meant that he was going to 2 feet less than what's there.
Which is, but I think it's only 4 feet.
It's 4 feet. So,
right. Okay.
So I don't think that's going to work.
That doesn't sound
It's basically it's basically a compromise. They're willing to compromise the functionality of the deck so that they don't lose it altogether.
I think
That's
you need to.
no longer a deck.
No, it's not. It's a balcony, right?
It's a step out.
It's like you can
where you stand,
toss
drink your
hair
coffee.
down, but you can't like actually sit in a chair.
My brother has one almost exactly like that. That's only 2 feet deep off of his master bedroom, and
does he sit out
there? He likes it. He goes out there and
he sits on a stool.
He mostly just
on the railing.
He mostly just stands with his cup of coffee.
Sounds relaxing.
Although when I was in Belgium a couple of years back, and they had those tiny little balconies.
That's what I'm talking about. The Juliet balcony. I think that's what they're called.
Is that what, where it's like inches deep.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is the point? You see,
so you can open the doors.
Well, you know what it comes down to is that's what they do. Is they just usually have a pair of French doors. You open them up, and it's almost as if your room then just becomes the balcony.
So
it's
you step back and you pretend you're in Paris.
But it actually works because they didn't have
if you're
screens.
in Belgium.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what he said? I thought he said Paris.
The Belgians all would want to be in Paris anyway.
It was this sort of early 20th century apartment in some much older building. And it had these big casement windows on the back opening to a courtyard and this big French doors on the front on this little shallow balcony. And you just open the 2 and it just gets a nice breeze going right through. So, I mean, there's some value to having a balcony even if you can't actually stand on it.
So in Amsterdam, like every house of a certain era has a big pulley at the top and all these kind of doors that open, and that's because you have to get your furniture in that way.
Well, actually, a lot of those were probably old warehouses too at one point during the shipping era.
I'm sure, and but I've seen photos of people getting like sofas hoisted up to their living space using one of these things, and it just looks fraught with peril, but also fun. So I'd say, in closing, this is AJ from Washington. Present your client with a few options and put numbers on them as best you can and let them make the call, because ultimately they're going to be the ones who have to live with it. If they want your advice, tell them to talk to an engineer.
Definitely. So I wanted to mention one thing. I was reading the show notes from a previous episode that I was not on, and you guys were giving advice to someone who was asking about understanding how to design a space that's comfortable. You know, you innately feel comfortable or not comfortable in certain spaces, and you just can't explain why. And there's a book and a website called Pattern Language.
Oh,
I mentioned that.
Yeah, you did mention
Did you
that.
mention that?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't see it in the notes, but yeah, that's,
Maybe I should put that in the notes.
Yeah,
for
That was
sure.
a good suggestion.
Oh, actually, I added it.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's a really. Did you talk about what it actually was?
Yeah.
How they basically did research of like human history to see what like spaces and details just made people functional and comfortable in their environments.
I would say that's the singular most important book to informing my design, aesthetic, and sensibilities. Like, it makes a lot of sense on a very intuitive level, which I have to go with regard to design.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys know that doomsday structures have become big business?
I mean, like bunkers.
Bunkers, yes. You even knew what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I call it hyper-masculine fantasy.
Sounds more elegant to call it a doomsday structure.
So this comes from the New York Times. This describes a 12-condo complex inside a former Kansas Cold War missile silo, which sounds lovely, doesn't
I can't
it?
breathe just thinking about it.
The units start at $1.3 million, and condo fees run about $2,600 monthly. So,
Yeah,
if
but you don't have to pay those condo fees once the.
I'm wondering,
world
where's the
ends,
money
right?
going, right?
Where do you get your food from? That's what I couldn't.
Oh, come on. So you got to let me.
Okay.
It's this thing is decked out, man.
Yeah, but only for so long.
So once again, from the New York Times, the Kansas developer Larry Hall, 62, of Survival Condo, has become one of the industry's best-known businessmen, mostly because of the complexity of his operation and his savvy promotion efforts. His condo complex sits down a country road past grazing cattle, a wire fence, and a guard in fatigues gripping a rifle. Wouldn't this be comfy to come home
Sounds
to?
lovely. How bucolic.
Visitors enter through a concrete dome. Below sits the apartments outfitted with fake windows made of digital screens, the subterranean swimming pool, a dog park, a weapons cache, and storerooms for food.
It's like an episode of Black Mirror.
Mr. Hall has outfitted the building with 5 air filters, connected it to the electrical grid, drilled a well to the local aquifer, set up diesel generators, a wind turbine, and a battery bank, all for backup power. The doors that cap the entire operation weigh 16 tons and close behind visitors with a booming slam. Man, I'd rather die in an apocalyptic event, I gotta say.
I'm right there with you. But he wrote storerooms for food, and then what?
What do you mean?
You can't grow food down there.
No.
I don't think so.
Grow lights.
They're just going to ride it out. It's going to
Yeah,
be good.
they're just hoping it's not going to last that long.
Yeah.
Oh, see, in my mind, it's forever. Like, that's where you go, and that's where you stay forever and ever. I suppose you can come out at some point.
So this particular story led me down a very interesting rabbit hole of a gentleman whose entire real estate enterprise is focused on buying these surplus missile silos, of which there are a surprising number. And you can buy them mostly in the Midwest, but there are some in Maine and upstate New York, and you can get these things for a song, I can tell you, compared to what the government spent building them, especially. So sometimes they're as little as a few $100,000, and they come with some acreage oftentimes, and a barbed wire fence.
I see one in your future. Seem excited about it.
I was really tempted. Yeah. I couldn't get Carol on board, though. She's like, missile silo, come on, that's so pedestrian.
Yeah, see,
She's like, what about a battleship?
well, that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking like a semi-submersible, like a big, just floating below the surface, like a little greenhouse boat that's just like no one can see it. It's out
What
in the
about
middle of the ocean.
the air problem, though? We need some air. I'm going to need scrubbers. I think with your technical background, you could definitely
Yeah,
come
we're
up
gonna-
with something.
We're going to have solar powered, electrical conversion technology that converts the water into breathable air and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So Liam's often telling me about these things he's going to invent, so you should get with him. Yeah. Boy, that's interesting. Like, so what do you think it's? I mean, have you seen the photos of this thing? So there are no
Inside,
windows.
Yeah, it's very dark seeming.
There are no windows. You get to look at TVs to like imagine what it's like
It's
outside.
like my worst nightmare.
I actually
TVs
saw
all around.
I saw something like that I don't know if it was originally intended to be a bunker, but it was in Las Vegas and some smarmy guy owned it.
Yes.
And it was on one of these TV shows for like weird homes.
Yes.
And it was like it had like a whole like
Grotto.
tiki hut grotto underneath it with like murals of really bad like seascapes.
It was horrible.
This
And
is all men's doing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, and this guy would have like parties down there, like they were on the beach, and it's just weird.
Can we close out the show now?
I was going
I
to say,
feel like
what,
going and hang out with Samantha.
we'll put the link on the website if any of you guys are interested in exploring a bunker for yourself or a loved one. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Kiley, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Thanks again for listening, and happy building.